that none of those perceived burdens are reality. They're all just stories that you're telling yourself. Hello and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Taryn McCarthy, and it is so wonderful to have you here again today. It is blizzarding, freezing outside right now, but as the storm comes down, I'm just so excited to be able to have the opportunity to be here and chat with you today. And thank you so much for joining me for our last episode with incredible Michael Alasso. Wasn't that fascinating? Talking about micro messaging and making sure that your audience receives the message that you're intending on giving. I just thought that was such a great message for us as we're all online and presenting ourselves on Zooms and on FaceTime. So really phenomenal episode. And then in our next episode, we're going to be speaking with Sandy Woznicki. She's incredible. She's a stress and anxiety coach. Who couldn't use one of those right now, right? So join us. You'll just be blown away by some of the messages and insights that she has. And today we're going to be talking about busting upper limits. I have been dying to get to this episode. I feel so passionately about this, and I cannot wait to share with you some of what I've learned in my journey and some of the incredible stories and insights that Gay Hendricks has to share with us. So we'll definitely get to that in a few minutes. But before we start, I do want to do a shout out to all of our new Bee Hive members. For those of you who don't know, we have this incredible private Facebook group called the Business of Happiness Hive. And members who come along and join us, I affectionately call our Bee Hivers. But the whole point of the group is to really create a community of support and empowerment and sharing resources with one another on how to see the world in a new and different way, and to really encourage looking at life and business and parenting and relationships from a positive attitude and in terms of uplifting ourselves and to find joy and happiness. So if that sounds interesting and intriguing to you, join us. Come on over to the Business of Happiness Hive, and welcome to our newest members, Jonathan, Lindsay, Holly, Miakez, Mary, Stacy, and Shadi. I'm so excited to have you on board. I can't wait to hear the wisdom that you have to share with us. And I hope to see many more of you on the Business of Happiness Hive. Well, without further ado, let's get talking about this incredible book, if any of you are familiar with it, called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. There you go, Gay Hendricks. And if any of you haven't read this book yet, I highly recommend it. It is excellent. One of the big takeaways of the book is how to address and how to recognize upper limits. And that's what we're talking about today, something that I've definitely noticed in my life and see in so many of my loved ones and in my friends and colleagues who are striving for success or happiness or achievement of some kind. And what an upper limit is defined as is when we find ourselves recognizing some amount of success, we start to self-sabotage. So how many of you can relate to that in terms of, I'm thinking of an example now, even just having just come through January of 2021, we set these high expectations and goals for ourselves. And if you set any kind of New Year's resolution and day 2, day 3, you're crushing it, and then you start self-sabotaging and breaking down those expectations of yourself. Or have you ever had an experience where you're in a relationship that's just feeling so good and everything feels so right and you're so excited to finally be in a loving, supportive relationship, and then you go and insert some negativity or do something to the relationship that you know will tear it down? It's that self-sabotage sneaking in again. These are these upper limits, almost like we have an expectation that we can only achieve so much success. And then we wait for the other shoe to fall. We wait for something negative to happen. Have you ever been in an excellent job or a career, and then you do something to sabotage it and you think, oh my gosh, why did I do that? I knew that would tear it down. If you've recognized that, that means you're being very introspective, because owning the responsibility of our actions is a huge part of recognizing when we establish those upper limits, when it just feels uncomfortable to succeed. I think the same is true in happiness. You get to a place where you feel like, wow, I'm living life at large. Everything is just going so well for me. And then you start to feel guilty or negative, or start looking at yourself with judgment, and you think, I really don't deserve this much joy. Let me insert a little bit of stress or anxiety, or let me see how I could see this differently. And really, that's the upper limit that we're talking about. What I love about Gay Hendricks is he really talks about how we all have this inner zone of genius, and that we should always strive for that zone of genius, because that's where true fulfillment and happiness lies. And that we each have this gift of genius, and that if we can recognize and accept and honor that zone of genius, we'll really find true success. So when he talks about upper limits, Gay Hendricks has identified 4 reasons, or 4 typical patterns of when we do insert those upper limits. And it's really fascinating to talk through each of them. I'd love you to just reflect on your own life when maybe you've self-sabotaged or denied yourself the achievement or success, and why you've done so. Maybe you'll identify with one of these 4. So the first one that we'll talk about is this idea that for some reason we're fundamentally flawed. Was there some time in our childhood or in our early years that someone told us that we were fundamentally flawed, just not deserving of true success or true happiness or true achievement? Somewhere along the way, did you get the idea that you just were not like everybody else and you didn't deserve that? It breaks my heart to even think about this, because we would never do this purposefully to our children. And yet, somewhere in childhood, we pick up these negative ideas about ourselves. And they weren't always intentionally put there, but there's something we grabbed onto and thought, yeah, you know what? I'm different and I don't deserve this. And do you see how that can create an upper limit later in life? Number 1, in relationships, where you think, oh, this is such a wonderful friend. I don't deserve such a great friend. Or even in a loving relationship, do I deserve this wonderful man in my life? And those ideas of being fundamentally flawed can be that restriction of realizing this true and beautiful opportunity to share happiness with someone. So that's one of the situations that Gay Hendricks outlines in terms of why we tend to create upper limits. The second one is this idea that we are a burden. I definitely can identify with this with many instances in my life. I'll give you an example. When you have goals or dreams in terms of a career or a path of creation or creativity, sometimes you start dreaming and thinking, oh, what would this look like? We've talked about this on the podcast before in terms of painting that portrait of success for yourself. And sometimes when you start painting what that will look like, you start inserting some fears about being a burden. So if I imagine one day I'd like to write a book. When I write a book, does that mean I'll have to take time away from my family? Oh, maybe I don't want to burden them in that way. And then when I have a book, might I need some more support in terms of a a receptionist who can help me with book deals or speaking engagements. Oh, but do I need the burden of hiring someone? Not only do I want to burden others, but do I want to take on further burden? And as soon as you start inserting those questioning thoughts and those fears of being a burden, you start to take away from your dream of achieving something like writing a book, being an author. That's just one example, but we can see how that relates even in relationships. Can you picture once you start to be in a wonderful relationship and you start to enjoy spending time together, you might think to yourself, oh, but is this going to take away from my free time? Do I want to be burdened by responsibilities for someone else? Or do I want to be a burden to them? Maybe they've enjoyed their freedom and I don't want to be a burden in terms of all the baggage I bring to the relationship. And do you see how immediately we start sabotaging our appreciation and the success of a really beautiful relationship? This is a big one. I think that many people struggle with this because we don't want to add more effort or work to other people's lives. And we don't want to add more effort and work onto our own. There's a great technique in neurolinguistic programming which talks about imagining those burdens as a heavy coat or a backpack. I like the idea of a coat. If you imagine when you put on that coat, adding rocks into the pockets, and each rock that you add is a burden, when you can identify those and specifically name them as you see them in your life. Well, I don't want to burden my husband because he'll have to take more time with the kids. I don't want to burden my mother because I'll be leaning on her more. I don't want to burden my patients because you see how this keeps going, and you feel heavier and a heavier pull on this coat of burdens that you're carrying. And once you've named all those burdens and put them in your pockets, then imagine unzipping the jacket and lifting it off your shoulders and laying it down. Because the truth is that none of those perceived burdens are reality. They're all just stories that you're telling yourself. And really, there's another way to see every aspect of it. And when you can just picture yourself taking off that coat and laying it down, you can see those rocks for what they are, just stories. In reality, if you are becoming so successful that you need to hire more people, you're not burdening them with your workload. You're giving them an opportunity to deliver their very best selves. You're beginning to offer work to people who really are passionate about that aspect. If you're hiring someone in terms of a financial position, there's so many people out there that love working with numbers, that love guiding and shaping money in terms of energy. That really you're opening up opportunities, but not adding burden. If we look back at the relationship situation, if you can take off that heavy coat and that rock that represents the burden you're putting on someone else's freedom, recognize that that person is looking for connection and for another human to experience this life with and to share the beauty of their days with. You're not burdening them. You're offering them this beautiful gift of sharing this life together. But just looking at that rock in a different way allows us to step up beyond that upper limit and see the lies that we've been telling ourselves and what's been holding us back from truly appreciating and accepting this new success. A third type of upper limit or reason for establishing an upper limit is the fear of outshining other people. Oh, this is a big one. This is a big one because maybe you grew up in a family where you maybe weren't the favorite, and your whole childhood you were thinking, I can't outshine her. she's the favorite, and I got to make sure that whatever I do, I hold back just a little bit. I definitely relate to this one, not so much in my family, but when we moved to America from South Africa, I was in middle school and wanting so badly to conform. And in South Africa at the time, it was very cool to be the very best at everything. I tried so hard to outshine and be the smartest and to sing the loudest and to run the fastest and to paint the prettiest picture. That was always my goal. And when we came to America, I realized very quickly that felt uncomfortable in the middle school, junior high arena. And always felt like I had to hold myself back. Whenever I wanted to belt out that song, I made sure I sang a little quieter. Whenever I tried out for a play, I wanted to make it into the play, but I didn't want to be the lead role because I didn't want to outshine someone else, because I was so concerned about creating friendships and acceptance. And it's interesting how during those formative years, it really impacted my ability to stand up and bust through those limiting beliefs, bust through those upper limits, because the fear of outshining someone can hold us back. That can be true in relationships as well. How many times have we seen couples where one holds themselves back either financially or in terms of success in their career, or perhaps even in health? You know, I want to make sure that I'm not as fit as I really can be because I don't want to make him feel so uncomfortable in his own body. Holding ourselves back is definitely a big reason why people create upper limits for themselves. And then the fourth one is fear of being disloyal or leaving someone behind. I think this happens to many people who are the first to go to higher education in their family, or coming from communities where not many people have achieved very much success or had a high education. Sometimes we hold ourselves back because we want to still connect with that community or that family, and we don't want to let our parents down and think that they might feel that we're being disloyal. You know, it's interesting that in this example, we're really assuming the judgment of others. And that's another time when we can use that heavy coat analogy and see all of those stories that are self-imposed shackles on our success, self-imposed limitations, just being able to recognize that's what's happening here. I don't want to be disloyal to my community, so I don't want to stand up and grow out of this. I'm holding myself back because I'm trying to maintain that same relationship and comfort. And it's interesting that it's sometimes our comfort level with where we are that prevents us from achieving even greater. Right now, this feels safe. I'm avoiding judgment. I'm avoiding exclusion. I don't feel like I'm being disloyal. And the truth of the matter is that those people who were able to rise up out of their negative situation, to pull themselves into a better relationship than their family has historically shown, or a greater sense of wealth or achievement, or even in terms of your body, if you're coming from a family where everybody was overweight and unhappy and depressed, and you feel like you have an opportunity to feel greater and better, you almost feel like you're disloyal to that family. But really, by showing them a different way, you can be a source of inspiration. By showing them that you can achieve more, by breaking that pattern, you can be an opportunity for others to think differently. And it's those superheroes who've come out of those difficult situations that we really look up to. And we really hope and aspire to be more like. Once again, those upper limits are just self-imposed, old stories. And it's really interesting because What Gay Hendricks speaks about in his book, and he has written several other books about relationships, is how many times relationships and our understanding of relationships holds us back. And I'm sure that you can imagine in your own life where that's happened. One of the key suggestions that Gay Hendricks offers is taking 100% responsibility for yourself and allowing others to take 100% responsibility for theirs. So in every relationship that ends up negatively, or in a toxic relationship, there might be a victim and a villain. And neither of those characters in the relationship are actually winning. But you can see how they're supporting each other, and this kind of victim-villain relationship can perpetuate for decades because the victim takes on more and more responsibility, and the villain very happily gives it up. But if you're not taking responsibility, you might be blaming the outcome of the person who is taking the responsibility. Has there been a situation in your life where you've seen that, where I don't even want to take responsibility for this, but I'm going to tell you all the times you're doing it wrong? Or have you imagined a time in your life where you've been taking on all the responsibility and flying in to save the day? I had this happen in my own life a few years ago, where I sat back and I realized I was just responding to crisis after crisis, taking on everybody else's responsibility. I did it without them even asking. I would fly in, swoop in, and see how I could save the day. In fact, on many of my texts with my friends, I noticed that my go-to response when someone was telling me they were having a hardship or just sharing something difficult in their life, I would say, "Tell me what I can do. How can I help?" And sometimes people just want to vent and share what's happening in their lives. They don't always want a solution from you. But I was taking on this responsibility for everybody else and depleting myself. And the negative thing about taking on other people's responsibilities is you also rob them of their power. You're not doing them any favors. By taking on other people's responsibilities and swooping in, saving the day, not only are you depleting yourself, but you're not giving them the opportunity to step up into their greatness and to take power and control of their own situation. So one thing that we often have to do is reevaluate our relationships in our lives in order to bust through those upper limits. Where in your life is a relationship causing you not to step into your greatness, not to step into your zone of genius? So sometimes people have asked me, well, how do I know when a relationship is toxic? Or how do I know when I'm in this point in a relationship where I really need to step outside of it in order to see this differently? And there are two ways that I've found. One is just hang on, because it'll get bad enough that you realize you don't have a choice. If a toxic relationship is perpetuating, you will definitely get to a place where you say, wow, this is preventing me from feeling joy and happiness. And instead of denying yourself the power to step outside of it, I would offer you permission to see it differently. The second way is to ask yourself, if you didn't have to deal with all the negativity in that relationship, or if you didn't have to every day be thinking about how this is affecting your life, asking yourself, is this a positive or a negative relationship? If you find that you're spending many of your hours in a day thinking about this relationship, ask yourself, what would I do with that time differently? If I could have all those hours of sleep back, if I could have all those hours of distraction from work when I'm thinking about this relationship with a friend or a colleague, if this wasn't swimming in my head all the time, what would I do with that time? How would I choose to use that time? I love that question because it does two very powerful things. Number one, it highlights how much time that toxic relationship has sapped from your life. And number two, it alerts you to that zone of genius. Because what your zone of genius is what lights you up. That zone of genius is what you wish you could do if you had free time in your day. The zone of genius is what gets those bubbles of excitement inside of you. It doesn't mean that you have to leave your day job to find happiness, but identifying where your zone of genius is can color your work, can color your interactions with your friends and your colleagues and your loved ones. Tapping into understanding what it is that lights you on fire is the secret to finding your happiness daily. And then why not choose to live in that space rather than dwelling in a negative relationship? You know, sometimes we hold on to the relationships for those same reasons that we hold on to our negative and limiting beliefs about ourselves. Either we feel like we don't deserve better, that we're fundamentally flawed, that we just have to stay in this relationship because that's what we get, or we don't want to burden someone else or burden ourselves with the responsibility of getting out of the relationship, or we don't want to disappoint or feel disloyal. In the meantime, you have to take 100% responsibility for your own life. And sometimes stepping out of those negative relationships frees up the other person as well. Because it doesn't matter which role you were playing, whether you were playing the victim or the villain, either one of you cannot be who you are meant to be and who your greater self can be without allowing each other the freedom to do so. And it's incredible how sometimes when we let go of those toxic relationships, or at least just give it some distance, years later you can re-find yourselves again and re-find that relationship in a healthier manner and not be dependent on this almost addictive relationship that you have going. So having, the courage to choose yourself and to choose 100% responsibility for your own actions, for your own life, for your own thought processes. It takes a lot. It takes a lot of courage to do so. But in there is so much strength. And in there is so much opportunity to reach higher and to really bust through that upper limit. I love the idea of taking responsibility for our own actions. It's an interesting discussion to have as a parent. I think so often we want to go in and help our children in so many ways and fly in and take on their responsibilities. But teaching them from the beginning that they don't need to take on anybody else's responsibilities, and they do need to take 100% ownership of their own, really gives them a lot of power and strength in their lives and gives them the tools to be able to show up to whatever life has to offer. You get to define your life by how much responsibility you take. And if you take 100% responsibility, then you can find all that beauty and 100% of who you are in your day, in every day. So I love this idea of busting upper limits. I could speak all day about it. I think it's really fascinating to dive into your own life and look at those examples where maybe you were holding yourself back for one of those 4 reasons, and recognizing that there's so much opportunity to live in your superpower, to live in your zone of genius. And the only person holding you back is yourself. Giving yourself permission to honor those beautiful parts within you, and then taking full responsibility for it for yourself and not asking anybody else to. Thank you again for joining me today. I definitely recommend this book for those of you who haven't read it, by Gay Hendricks, The Big Leap. Excellent, excellent read. And please share it with others who you think might enjoy the message as well. And until next time, when we speak with Sandy Woznicki about stress and overwhelm, I wish you a fabulous day because I know today is going to be a great day. And I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.